The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
An In the Loop special edition, Down and Dirty in Chicago, a closer look at urban pollution. The EPA finds dangerously dirty air around Union Station downtown, and it gets even worse during rush hours. The city makes a massive effort to clean up the sewage that still pollutes Chicago's waterways. And 5 years into mandatory recycling, is it finally making a difference? That's all coming up on tonight's special edition of In the Loop. Good evening. I'm Chris Bury. The American Lung Association has once again given Cook County a grade of F for air quality. Ozone levels are slightly better than they were last year, but too many days are still too dangerous for too many people. One vivid example of how dirty the air can get in the Chicago area is found in the industrial neighborhoods of the city's southeast side. The latest battle in a long-standing dispute comes as residents complain that companies are filling the air with a powdery petroleum byproduct called pet coke.
Look at all that. Then up here, oh hell.
2 years ago, we took you inside the home of Peter Cerniak to see firsthand the toxic black dust coating most of his furniture. Cerniak relies on oxygen to help him breathe. He has COPD, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, after a lifetime working in steel mills and living where coal was once stored. His house right across the road from the KCBX terminal owned by Koch Carbon, and across the Calumet River from Beamsterburg Slag, two companies that stored massive piles of pet coke. When the wind blew, the sky was filled with thick black clouds, making it hard for nearby residents to breathe. Recently, the mountains of pet coke were hauled out by Beamsterburg after the city of Chicago responded to resident complaints and imposed a new ordinance forcing companies to eliminate or reduce those piles of pet coke.
The people, united, will never be divided.
But it was a hollow victory, because residents today are still plagued by dust in the air and in their homes, so they once again took their complaints to the street.
My election, our election, was a testament that people can beat big money.
Yeah!
Newly elected 10th Ward Alderman Susan Sadlowski Garza spoke at a citizens' rally for the environment. Neighborhood residents want all pet coke operations shut down. Pet coke is the byproduct of processing Canadian tar sands into crude oil. The black powder has been linked to asthma and other respiratory ailments. KCBX is making money by selling the pet coke to India and China, where it's used to heat homes and generate power. The city ordinance banning pet coke forbids companies from expanding their operations. But KCBX is now changing its focus from storing the pet coke in big piles to distributing it. And instead of arriving by the truckload, the pet coke now comes in open railroad cars from oil refineries in Joliet and Lamont, which means the black powder is allowed to scatter in the wind as it moves along the rails. One area resident even wrote a song about it.
The pet coke train, 110 cars long, please paint that train bright red.
Small piles of pet coke can easily be found along the tracks leading into the KCBX facility.
This is real dusty stuff. This blows around all the time. Look at as it comes off of my hand.
Tom Shepard is executive director of the Southeast Environmental Task Force, which has been leading efforts to rid the neighborhood of pet coke.
Some houses that are practically valueless because of the property values being decreased because of its proximity to this plant here.
Since the 1800s, when steel mills set up shop along the Calumet River, the skies on the southeast side have often been filled with billowy clouds of smoke. For years, residents put up with it because they could support their families by working in the factories. But as those jobs have dried up, residents now say they're tired of being the dumping ground for Chicago industry. They are demanding change.
We're looking forward to some new industry coming in here that will be cleaner. We don't want to be known as historically a dirty area and to have a continuation of that.
In a statement released in response to those protests, KCBX says, quote, nearly 2 years of air monitoring data show that air quality near the KCBX terminals is consistent with federal clean air standards. Today, we're joined by Henry Henderson, Director of the Natural Resources Defense Council, Midwest Region, Kim Wasserman, Director of Organizing and Strategy for the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, and Brian Urbiszewski, Director of Environmental Health Programs for the Respiratory Health Association, and welcome everybody. So we saw in the Petcoke story, Henry, the residents finally getting some success. There's a new ordinance. Can they declare victory yet?
No, they cannot declare victory. The piles still remain, particularly in the largest part of the KCBX facility. They can look at the fact that the northern facility KCBX ran is now empty. The Beemster bore, the Petcoke has been removed. It is moving forward, but the problem remains, and the problem is endemic to the area because it is seen by industry, by a lot of government, and by a lot of people within the civic community as a sacrifice zone that can continue to be dumped on. That's wrong, and that is the thing we have to turn the corner on.
Kim, you've been involved in these kinds of battles. You were instrumental in the fight to shut down coal-fired power plants in Little Village neighborhood and other neighborhoods on the southwest side. What's your advice to that community based on your own experience?
They have to keep fighting. The reality is nobody should have to live like that. And as Henry said, it's unacceptable that those piles are even still out there. That community deserves a better vision, a better way of life, and they should continue to fight and continue to fight until they get what they want, which is no more Petcoke on the southeast side of Chicago.
And Brian, Henry just alluded to something that we saw in the setup story, which is there's been a trade-off in that area for a long time. As long as there were factories there that had good jobs and a good standard of living, it seemed that people were willing to put up with it. Those jobs are gone, but is the pollution left behind?
Well, I mean, you look at what's going on in there, and I've heard stories from some of the folks in the neighborhood where they've had a child's birthday party, and because of what's coming off of those huge piles, the birthday cake actually was covered with black soot. I mean, that shouldn't happen to anybody. Nobody should be forced to breathe that. The jobs in the steel industry have largely disappeared, but like Tom said on the intro piece, the community is actually looking for how they want a development going forward, and they really want green, clean jobs in that area, and they deserve it just like anybody else does. For the record, KCBX, one of the companies that operates the terminal there, says that it is complying with all federal air quality standards.
I don't think that's true at all. It is completely not demonstrated. That's the fact. There are repeated instances of material coming off those piles. What is being monitored at present is not the smallest particulate matter, which the EPA admits is the most dangerous in terms of causing lung damage, causing heart failure, et cetera, et cetera. This is not over. It's not going to be over, and it's not going to be over until the vision that Kim was talking about is in place. I'll give you an example. Just south of that site, former Wisconsin Steel site, where at one time it employed 175,000 people. Nobody works there now. And you have contaminated property. The Corps of Engineers is saying, let's put a combined storage facility on this site, bringing toxic sludge from around the Great Lakes and pile it up here because it's already contaminated. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that's not what the people who live there deserve. And until we got this vision in place, it will continue to suck bad behavior in there, which the community has fought for 30 years.
On air quality, we've had another big story in Chicago, and that is around Union Station. Levels of diesel pollutants. The EPA has said that they're many times, as much as 8 times higher than the federal standards. What is the impact of that for people downtown?
Well, I mean, we worked on this issue several years ago, and it got to the level where Senator Durbin actually got involved in telling Metro that they needed to do something to clean up those trains. And several years ago, there were some actions taken where Metro started using some cleaner diesel fuel. They got better maintenance practices in place, and did what they could to reduce the soot from those trains. But you have to understand, there's over 350 trains going in and out of Union Station, which is largely a cave underground. And what needs to happen is that the ventilation systems need to be improved in the buildings that are above the tracks to get rid of that pollution that's orders of magnitude higher than it should be. And we need to find a revenue stream to start repairing and replacing some of those locomotives. Some of the locomotives that Metra is running are from the disco era. They're over 35 years old. And that really needs to change to solve that problem.
And it's even worse at rush hour, much worse, according to
Much worse.
Let's step back a little bit and talk about the bigger picture. For many years in a row now, the American Lung Association has given our region, Cook County, a grade of F when it comes to air quality. And Kim, what is the real problem there? Is it ozone levels? What are they talking about?
You know, I think it's a combination of things. I mean, I think you've seen Chicago take on large sources of pollution like the coal power plants and doing a great job in shutting them down. But I think we also need to be looking at small sources in our communities, everything from pet coke through small industry as well. And not just looking at it in isolation, but looking at it as the cumulative impact of all of these industries located on the southeast side, the southwest side, because when you combine all of this air pollution together, it creates a toxic soup, if you will. So I think a lot of the reason why we get an F is because a lot of our work has been broader, and we need to start coming into the neighborhoods and really figuring out what is happening on a local level and how is that contributing to the overall quality of air in Chicago.
Well, what is the source of that pollution? Are we talking about cars? Are we talking about diesel locomotives, power plants? I mean, what should we be looking at there?
You have to think of it as sort of a layer cake. I mean, there is a fog over the entire eastern half of the United States from coal-fired power plants. Those tall stacks, hundreds of feet high, are designed to spread air pollution out, and that's what they do. There's, about 2 dozen in Illinois. There's many others. There's hundreds of them around the eastern half of the United States. And all the exhaust from all those power plants is leading to a haze that sort of permeates everywhere, rural areas and even urban areas like Chicago. Chicago has the added detriment of having a lot of traffic on top of that.
So we combine all that together.
And so we get a layer of diesel on
real,
top of what's coming in from a lot of those coal plants.
A real issue. Chicago also has a significant problem with water pollution. It's the last city in the country to disinfect the water that gets flushed down your toilet, and that's the work of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. So we decided to send our cameras where few dare to go, the NWRD's newly retooled treatment center. Flushing a toilet triggers a series of events that eventually leads to that wastewater going back into our rivers and lakes. That is raw sewage pouring into the Metropolitan Water Reclamation Plant in Calumet on Chicago's far south side. On a typical day, this massive facility handles about 350 million gallons. After screening out large objects, it's on to one of 52 settling tanks where oxygen and microorganisms are added. Brian Perkovich is the operations manager at the Calumet plant.
The water comes here and gravity settles out the bacteria that's not needed anymore. And the clean water falls over the weir and goes over to the contact chamber for disinfection.
The contact chamber is a huge maze of concrete where the disinfectant will be added. Stored in massive tanks in a separate building, it's basically chlorine bleach, only about 10 times stronger than the bleach you buy at the store.
You can see it's pretty complicated stuff. A lot of pressure transmitters, there's analyzers.
It's a tricky balancing act. Adding too much disinfectant to the water could damage the river and aquatic life. To prevent that, another chemical is introduced.
So this is the sodium bisulfite room, and this is the chemical that's added after the sodium hypochlorite is added to the process.
All of this sophisticated chemistry is taking place outside in those big contact chambers where the clean water gets disinfected.
So the hypochlorite's been introduced. It's working its way through this labyrinth of concrete, working its way out to the waterway.
The entire disinfection process takes only about 15 minutes. The treated water flowing slowly through the contact chamber and over a series of waterfalls which add oxygen to the mix. And then it's finally released into the nearby Little Calumet River. From start to finish, it's an 8-hour journey. Calumet is one of 7 water treatment plants that the Water Reclamation District operates. The biggest is the Stickney plant, the largest one of its kind in the world. It handles about 700 million gallons of sewage per day. But surprisingly, that plant is not being required to disinfect its discharge water. At another site, the O'Brien plant in Skokie, the district is using a different method to disinfect the water: ultraviolet radiation.
The Water Reclamation District is doing its best to keep the waterways as clean as possible, and this is just one step achieving the goal of making the waterways clean, fishable, swimmable, and being able to be used by people.
And we're back with our panel. Henry, it was a surprise to me that Chicago was the very last city in the nation to disinfect its water. What's taken so long?
It's astonishing. And the Water Reclamation District was created in order to reverse the Chicago River and send our garbage and waste and sewage to Peoria, St. Louis, and the Gulf of Mexico. The Chicago area is the largest contributor to contaminants that go into the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. It's a shocking thing. And the longest proceeding before the Illinois Pollution Control Board in history was trying to get this agreement to disinfect. So there's a partial movement to disinfect. But the district continues to see the Chicago River as basically an adjunct to their sewer system. Even with the disposal of this problem in the two treatment plants, we still have the addition of untreated sewage. Every time we get over 1.25 inches of rain in the city of Chicago, it dumps it into the river, untreated, through our combined sewer system, and often we have it so much going in there that it has to be dumped into the lake. So,
at the same time, the federal government has come out and said it's mandated that it wants these rivers, including the Little Calumet River, clean enough to swim in. Kim, you got your bathing suit ready?
You know, this is actually really interesting because in our neighborhood, we butt up with the sanitation canal. And we've been fighting for access to the canal, but not necessarily to swim in, because we recognize the concerns that every time it rains, there is a lot of sewage going into this water, and its historical uses as well. I think we really want to see more of an effort to continue to clean up our river system. Even in the case of the sanitation canal, it's man-made, but it's something, and it's better than nothing. I think that nobody deserves, just like the Petcoke, nobody deserves to live next to a canal that smells like methane and is giving off bubbles, and you just cannot at all recreate in. You can canoe, but the word of advice is you wipe yourself down with antibacterial soap when you're done. At some point, it would be great to see these rivers come back to life and really be an asset to the communities like they can be.
Brian, we hear whenever there's a heavy rain that things get worse. The deep tunnel project, which has cost billions of dollars, supposed to at least partially take care of that. Is that enough?
Well, it's interesting to look at the nexus here between air pollution and water pollution, because one of the things that's in the news right now is we're dealing with global warming, finally. The EPA has come out with a plan that says coal-fired power plants have to reduce their carbon dioxide, which is making global warming worse. One of the side effects of global warming, in addition to like hotter temperatures, is you get more intense rainstorms. And that's going to continue going forward, and it's going to be a continuing challenge. And while the Deep Tunnel project has lessened the amount of pollution going into the river system, the challenge is that going forward, we're going to have more and more intense rainstorms, which, like Henry said, is going to lead to more overflows. So this is a problem that's really not going to go away and requires a lot more resources.
Henry, Mayor Emanuel has said that the Chicago River is the next recreational frontier. Mm-hmm. Is it still a pretty dangerous frontier?
Well, if you like to recreate in somebody's toilet, it is a dangerous frontier. I like to look at his building a series of boathouses as a promissory note, that we're building boathouses to get people on the river because we intend to clean it up. Mm-hmm. It's an essential thing that we clean this up. But I think it's also important to recognize it continues to pollute the Great Lakes, continues to pollute the Mississippi, but it also pollutes people's basements. Mm-hmm. Literally tens of thousands of people's basements flood with untreated sewage because of the inadequacy of the sewage treatment facilities that deliver contaminated water to our open waters and to our basements. It's a threat to the public health and safety and to the quality of life in the city and to the value of our real estate.
And Kim, is this a job that's still undone? We saw this large treatment facility is finally disinfecting the sewage that flows back into the waterways. But the largest one, the Stickney one, still, from what I understand, does put water that's been treated but has not been disinfected back into the waterways.
Correct. And Stickney is located right next to Cicero, right past our community, and there are times that we can still pick up the smell. And we know for a fact that folks in Cicero and in Stickney have been organizing for a long time around the smells coming out of that plant. And it's unfortunate that folks have to live with that in their backyard. But I think to the point that was being made, we have to continue to work on these systems and really figure out, both collectively as MWRD and as communities that are affected, how do we collectively deal with this so that folks aren't having that smell but can also recreate in these bodies of water safely, and that we're not contributing to other bodies of water dying down as well.
Yeah, and the kind of things that we've seen the city do, like for instance in Grand Park, where they've done this incredible greening of the city, that manages the water so it doesn't go into our sewers, so then it doesn't overcome it and then dump untreated sewage into the lake and the river, into people's basements. Green roofs do the same thing. There are many, many things that can be done that actually invest in the quality of life, improve the economy, and improve our health and safety.
Absolutely.
In the meantime, as you mentioned, we are seeing kayakers in the Chicago River. At the same time, these tests are showing incredibly high levels of fecal matter. Yeah. Is it still safe enough for recreation?
Well, they're in imminent endangerment of a face full of intestinal miasma. Let's just put it that way.
That is not a very pleasant thought. On that note, we need to switch to pollution on the ground. And here in Chicago, that's commonly known as garbage. 5 years after Chicago ordered mandatory recycling across the city, is it making a real difference for the environment? This is one of 75 trucks moving through the streets and alleys of Chicago every 2 weeks, collecting recyclables from the city's 600,000 homes. In 2007, then-Mayor Richard M. Daley introduced Chicago's Blue Cart Recycling Program in 7 neighborhoods. 5 years later, Mayor Rahm Emanuel expanded it throughout Chicago.
It's a single-stream recycling collection system, meaning all of your recyclables can be placed into that cart collectively or commingled. So that's paper, plastic, metals, glass, and cartons.
Christopher Schwab is Program Director of Recycling for the City of Chicago.
Recycling obviously has huge environmental benefits in terms of reusing old products, conserving natural resources, in terms of reducing greenhouse gases and your overall carbon footprint that you might have as a resident. In 2014, we collected over 100,000 tons of recyclables. This truck here will collect about 10 to 12 tons of material throughout the course of its day.
That still pales in comparison to the amount of garbage the city collects, more than 1 million tons a year. But far too much of that trash could be recycled, and some of it is even against the law to throw out, including electronics, chemicals, prescription medicine, and other materials that don't belong in trash cans. To help residents get rid of that stuff, the city has opened several disposal facilities, such as this one on the north side in Goose Island. Dave Graham is Assistant Commissioner for the Chicago Department of Public Health.
The city used to do one-time collection events. The collection events were expensive and they weren't very successful, so we saw a need to create a single facility within the city of Chicago for the public to drop off household chemicals and old electronics. Since the inception of this facility opening up in 2006, we've taken approximately 2.8 million pounds of electronic waste. We've accepted about 1.7 million pounds of household hazardous waste, and we've taken approximately 51,000 pounds of used medication.
Recycling has become a big business. Private companies such as AVA E-Recycling in Glendale Heights are profiting from the trend. What started as a small family business now has grown into multiple locations and 15 full-time employees. The firm recycles electronic waste, destroys data, refurbishes appliances, and resells them for retail.
Part of our reuse and resell, we take, fix it, and give it back to the public. You can get refrigerators anywhere from $80 to $300 that used to cost $1,000, $2,000.
The recycling business also benefits the environment, helping keep landfills free of big, bulky items made of metal, plastic, and other long-lasting materials.
So you have many, many companies throughout Illinois that have rised up and said, hey, we'll take the initiative. Everybody's trying to do their part.
And back again with our panel. So we're 5 years into this recycling program in Chicago. Brian, has it made a difference?
Yeah, I think it really has. I mean, people, didn't know what to do at first, and there was a lot of confusion. And I think just the persistence of, reinforcing that through the media, I think, has helped a lot.
Kim, there's still, according to the city, massive amounts of non-compliance. Some areas of the city apparently doing a pretty good job, other areas ignoring it altogether, even though you can actually get fined if you put the wrong stuff in your garbage.
Absolutely, and I think this is an indication of why it's important to have more than just one center on the north side where you can get your recycling done. This is something that should be done in every community. Currently, our neighborhood accepts garbage from 8 different zip codes at the sorting center in our neighborhood. It would be great if we could sort just our own garbage. Every community should have to deal with their own garbage. I think everywhere from New York to other communities, you're seeing low-income communities of color having that garbage coming into their neighborhoods. We're not benefiting from the jobs, and in fact, what we're seeing in our neighborhood is a huge growth of metal recycleries that are leaching into the sewer system, that are incredibly dangerous, that put people and families at risk in the neighborhood. And the jobs, there are no jobs. People are peddling metal for nickels and quarters. I think that the city could grow its recycling program by leaps and bounds and get more folks involved if they really focused it on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis, and folks understood how much garbage they're producing and really understood that their garbage is not going off to some magical land. It is still staying here in the city, and what we do with it is going to be incredibly important the more we move on into the future.
Henry, are you convinced that this recycling program has in fact had significant environmental benefits?
I think it's having genuine benefits. I think that looking at the Goose Island facility for hazardous waste and whatnot is an important pilot. You can see how it's done. You can see that it functions. There was a great deal of reluctance within the city to even open that because there was a fear of endangerment. We see it performing. The thing is, how does it get scaled up to deal with the waste stream as a whole? And it is very much in the lower entry levels of a new economy. This could fit within a real new economy, as Kim has said.
So you raised the economic question, and is it going to take the profit motive to really convince people to recycle? As we saw, some people, little businesses are taking advantage, but can ordinary people make some money out of this?
Absolutely, and I think it's really a question of communities like the Southeast Chicago, like a little village, taking on and given the responsibility by the city to say, all right, how do we create jobs out of this? How do we really create this as part of the economy in your communities? Folks on the Southeast side are ready, not just for this type of work, but for work on demolition of buildings and separating what that does to the landfills as well. And so I think there's a lot of innovation that can happen here that attaches to the economy. It's a question of entrusting our communities to know what they want to do and give them the tools to be able to do it.
I also think there's an important element here in terms of reducing waste. Just look at a very, very huge part of our waste stream. 40% of the food in the United States is thrown out. 40%. 80% of that is water content. Huge amount of that comes from California, which is in a drought. This is a cascading reality if that we are reducing waste, reducing the cost of managing waste, and we're actually feeding things back into the economy that presently are just utterly, totally, and completely wasted while people in the world go hungry. Makes no sense.
And Brian, you mentioned education. What do people have to know about what they can't throw out?
Well, I'm just trying to think about how this, sort of ties together with water pollution and air pollution. I mean, Henry was mentioning earlier that, a lot of this material that goes to a landfill, the landfills themselves aren't secure. And so a lot of this stuff is leaching out into the groundwater where people have well water for outlying communities. So it's something that affects people beyond Chicago, and it affects real people. Same thing with air pollution. I mean, one of the benefits of reducing food waste is that you're not carting water somewhere to a landfill using a diesel truck, which is going to add to air pollution. So people, I think, need to realize more that it's not just the item that they're throwing out, but the stream that it's in and what it impacts downstream.
You make a great point that it all ties together: air, water, and land. Well, that wraps up this special presentation. I would like to thank Henry Henderson, Kim Wasserman, and Brian Urbaszewski. To learn more about our guests, we invite you to log on to wycc.org and link to In the Loop. And next week, Illinois has a critical shortage of home health care nurses. We'll take a look at how that's impacting seniors and special needs children. Until then, I'm Chris Bury. Thanks for joining us, and good night.